My name is Carmen Rodriguez. I was born and raised in the sunny streets of Seville, where the scent of orange trees and the sound of castanets permeate the air. The daughter of a baker and a seamstress, I grew up in a modest home, but full of love and solid values. From a very young age I learned the importance of hard work and perseverance. I never imagined that my path would cross with that of Alejandro Montero, heir to one of the most influential families in Madrid. Our encounter was worthy of a movie scene. I was working as a waitress in a charming cafeteria in Plaza de España to finance my nursing studies when he walked in, looking a bit lost and out of place in his expensive suit. "Excuse me, miss," he said with a shy smile. "Could you recommend a good place to try authentic Sevillian cuisine?" Something in his eyes, a mixture of curiosity and kindness, immediately captivated me. "Of course," I replied, feeling my cheeks redden. "There's a little restaurant not far from here that serves the best gazpacho in town. If you want, I'll show you the way." That innocuous conversation turned into hours of chatter. Alejandro was unlike any man I had ever met before. Behind his sophisticated appearance was a simple and curious soul. She told me that she was in Seville on business, but that she wanted to discover the true essence of the city, far from the beaten tourist paths. "You know, Carmen," he told me as the sun began to set in the plaza, "I've never met anyone like you. You have a way of talking about Seville that makes it come alive, as if every stone has a story to tell." I couldn't help but laugh. That's because every stone here has a story. Seville is a city that lives and breathes history in every corner. What was to be a simple restaurant recommendation turned into an impromptu tour of the city. I took him through the back streets of the Santa Cruz neighborhood, showing him the hidden courtyards and secret plazas that only the locals know about. Alejandro absorbed my words, and his eyes lit up with each new discovery. As night fell and the lanterns lit up the streets, creating an almost magical atmosphere, I realized that something extraordinary was happening. An undeniable connection had been established between us, one that transcended our social differences. "Carmen," Alejandro said as we stood on the Triana Bridge, watching the waters of the Guadalquivir reflect the lights of the city, "I know it may sound crazy, but I don't want this night to end. I feel like I have found something special here with you." My heart was pounding. I knew I felt the same, but a part of me was terrified. "Alejandro, this is a beautiful evening, but we come from different worlds. You will go back to Madrid, to your life, and I will stay here." He took my hand gently. "What if I don't want to go back to that life? What if I want to explore what we've found here?" The next few days were like a dream. Alejandro extended his stay in Seville, claiming he had business that was dragging on. We spent all our free time together. I showed him my Seville, with its bustling markets, its hidden tablaos flamencos and its small churches full of history. He told me of his life in Madrid, of his family's heavy expectations, of his desire to do something meaningful with his life. But like all dreams, this one had to face reality. 2 weeks after we met, Alejandro had to return to Madrid. The night of his departure, we met again at the same cafe where it all began. "Carmen," he says, his eyes filled with a determination I've never seen before, "these 2 weeks have been the most authentic and happiest of my life. I can't go back to my life before and pretend nothing has happened." I felt my heart clench. "What do you mean, Alejandro?" "I mean I want to continue what we started here. I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I've never been so sure of anything in my life. I want to be with you, Carmen." The following months were a whirlwind of emotions. Alejandro went back and forth between Madrid and Seville, combining his family responsibilities with our budding relationship. Every time he left, a part of my heart went with him. It was during one of his visits, as we were strolling through the gardens of the Alcázar, when Alejandro knelt down in front of me and pulled a small box from his pocket. "Carmen Rodriguez," he says, his voice trembling with emotion, "you have changed my life in a way I never thought possible. You've taught me what it really means to live, to love, and to be authentic. Will you marry me?" With tears in my eyes, I said yes. But our happiness would soon be put to the test. When Alejandro announced our engagement to his family, the reaction was far from what we expected. His mother, Dona Elena, a member of the Madrid aristocracy known for her snobbery, was furious. A Montero marrying a waitress from Seville? That's unacceptable, I heard him shout over the phone during a call with Alejandro. Despite his family's opposition, Alejandro remained steadfast in his decision. I love you, Carmen, he often told me. No matter what my family thinks, I choose you. The wedding preparations were stressful. Every decision seemed to be subject to the scrutiny and criticism of Alejandro's family. I tried to stay strong, to remember that our love was more important than their approval, but there were times when I was assailed by doubts. My family, though modest, supported me unconditionally. My mother spent entire nights sewing details of my wedding dress, putting all her love and hopes for my future into it. My child, she would often tell me, true love transcends social class. If Alejandro loves you for who you are, that's all that matters. As the big day approached, the tension with Alejandro's family, in particular with his mother, only increased. Dona Elena never missed an opportunity to make disparaging remarks about my origins or my lack of refinement. At our last meeting before the wedding, she looked me up and down with disdain and said, "I hope you realize what you are getting into, my dear. Our world is not for people like you." These words hurt me, but I drew on the strength my love for Alejandro had given me. With all due respect, Dona Elena, I replied, holding my head high, I am not looking to join your world. Alejandro and I are creating our own. On the eve of the wedding, in front of the mirror in my small apartment in Seville, admiring the dress my mother had worked so lovingly on, I couldn't help but think how much my life had changed. From being a simple waitress who dreamed of becoming a nurse, I was about to marry the man I loved, defying all social conventions. Little did I know that the biggest challenge was yet to come, and that it would test not only our love, but also my endurance and determination. The night before my wedding should have been filled with joyful anticipation and nervous excitement. Instead, it turned into a nightmare I could never have imagined, even in my worst fears. The day had started quietly. I woke up early, my heart pounding at the thought that in less than 24 hours I would be Mrs. Montero. My mother had come to help me with the final preparations, and we had spent the morning going over all the details one last time. My child, my mother had said as she adjusted the veil of my wedding dress hanging on my closet door, you will be the most beautiful bride Seville has ever seen. I smiled, touched by her obvious pride. Thanks to you, Mom. This dress is a true masterpiece. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of final checks and phone calls. Alejandro called me late in the afternoon, his voice full of love and anticipation. Carmen MIA, he had said to me, I count the minutes until tomorrow. I love you so much. I love you too, Alejandro, I replied, my heart overflowing with happiness. See you tomorrow, my love. As the sun began to set, tinting the Sevillian sky with shades of orange and pink, I decided to take a relaxing bath. It was then that I heard a knock at the door. Thinking it might be my mother coming back with something she had forgotten, I quickly put on a robe and headed for the door. But when I opened it, I did not see my mother's loving face. It was the cold, scornful face of Dona Elena, Alejandro's mother. Good evening, Carmen, she had said, her voice laden with false courtesy. May I come in? I'd love to chat with you for a while. Surprised and a little uncomfortable, I stepped aside to let her pass. Of course, Dona Elena. I wasn't expecting your visit. He had entered my modest apartment and his scrutinizing gaze roamed over every nook and cranny with barely concealed disdain. His eyes landed on my wedding dress. So that's what you're going to wear to marry my son? She asked, her voice tinged with contempt. I felt my heart clench. My mother sewed it herself, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Dona Elena had laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. Evidently, you can't expect a girl in your condition can afford a proper wedding dress. I clenched my fists, struggling to maintain my composure. Dona Elena, if you have come here to insult me, I will ask you to leave. Tomorrow I am going to marry Alejandro, whether you like it or not. Her face had hardened, all pretense of politeness disappearing. That's where you're wrong, my dear. There will be no wedding tomorrow. Before I could react, she pulled a small bottle from her purse. With a quickness I would never have suspected, she walked over to my wedding dress and began pouring the contents into it. What are you doing? I shouted, running to her. But it was too late. The pungent smell of kerosene had filled the room as the liquid soaked the pristine white cloth. Horrified, I watched as Dona Elena pulled a lighter from her pocket. "No!" I screamed, but she had already lit the flame. In an instant, my wedding dress went up in flames, the flames quickly devouring the fruit of so many hours of my mother's labor and love. The heat and smoke forced me to retreat, tears running down my cheeks as I watched helplessly as my dreams vanished. Dona Elena had turned to me, her face illuminated by the dancing flames. Her eyes glowed with an almost demented glare as she snapped at me, "A low-life rat like you doesn't deserve to be part of our elite family. You will not marry my son, do you hear me, ever?" I stood there, paralyzed with shock and horror, unable to move or speak. The crackling flames seemed to mock me, consuming not only my dress, but all my hopes and dreams for the future. Satisfied with her work, Dona Elena headed for the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. "If you have any sense, you will disappear from my son's life. If you don't, I promise this is just the beginning of what I can do to you." The door closed behind her, leaving me alone in front of the disaster. As if in a dream, I managed to extinguish the flames with a blanket, but the damage was done. My beautiful wedding dress was now a smoldering pile of blackened fabric. I collapsed on the floor, shaking with uncontrollable sobs. How could this have happened? How could such cruelty exist? All the insecurities I had managed to overcome over the months came back to my mind. Maybe Dona Elena was right. Maybe I didn't belong in Alejandro's world. For what seemed like hours, I stood there, unable to move, staring at the charred remains of my dress. The scent of orange blossom that usually hung in the civilian air had been replaced by the pungent smell of burnt fabric and kerosene. It wasn't until my phone rang that I came out of my trance. It was Alejandro. "Carmen, my love," he had said cheerfully, "I know they say it's bad luck to talk to the bride on the eve of the wedding, but I couldn't resist. I can't wait to see you tomorrow in your beautiful dress." His words hit me like a dagger. How was I to tell him what had happened? How was I to explain to him that his own mother had destroyed our marriage before it had even begun? "Alejandro," she had managed to say, her voice trembling, I can't get married tomorrow." "What?" His cheerful tone had immediately turned to concern. "Carmen, what's wrong? What's wrong with you?" I had taken a deep breath, trying to control my sobs. "Your mother, she came here. She burned my wedding dress. He said I didn't deserve to be in your family." The silence on the other end of the line had been deafening. Then I heard Alejandro curse under his breath. "I'll be right there," he said before hanging up. The minutes that followed seemed endless. I tried to pull myself together and clean up the mess, but every time I looked at the remains of my dress, I was overcome with a new wave of grief and despair. When Alexander finally arrived, breathless and wide-eyed with worry, I threw myself into his arms, letting my tears flow freely. "I'm so sorry, my love," he had whispered, hugging me tightly. "I never imagined my mother could go this far. What she has done is unforgivable." He had gently guided me to the couch, sitting next to me as he kept his arms around my shoulders. "Carmen, look at me," he had said, cupping my face in his hands. "I love you. Nothing my mother says or does will change that. We are getting married, with or without her blessing." His words warmed my heart, but the doubt persisted. "But Alejandro, how are we going to get married now? I don't have a dress anymore, and your family." She interrupted me with a soft kiss. "Our love is stronger than that, Carmen. A dress, no matter how beautiful, is only a symbol. What counts is our commitment to each other. As for my family, if they can't accept my choice, that's their problem, not ours." Despite her determination, she knew the situation was not that simple. The wedding was scheduled for the next day. Hundreds of guests awaited. And beyond the practicalities, there was the emotional pain. How was I to walk down the aisle knowing that the mother of the man I was to marry hated me to the point of wanting to sabotage our union? "What should we do?" I asked, feeling completely lost. Alejandro had taken a deep breath. "First, we'll call Lucia. She's your best friend and a talented stylist. If anyone can help us in this situation, she can." I nodded, grateful that Alejandro was taking charge at a time when I felt unable to think clearly. He pulled out his phone and dialed Lucia's number. As I briefly explained the situation to my friend, I got up to get a glass of water, trying to calm my frayed nerves. As I passed the hallway mirror, I saw my reflection: bloodshot eyes, messy hair, pale, drawn face. Was it really the image of a bride-to-be? "Lucia is on her way," Alejandro had announced as he hung up. He said he might have a solution, but he had to see the extent of the damage first. I nodded, grateful for this small glimmer of hope. But one question kept nagging at me. "Alejandro," I said quietly, "what are you going to tell your mother? Your family?" His face had darkened. "My mother will have to accept the consequences of her actions. What she has done is unforgivable, and I will not let it go. As for the rest of my family, those who support us will be welcome at our wedding. The others, well, their absence will be no great loss." His words were strong, determined, but I could see the pain in his eyes. I knew how important his family was to him, despite their differences. The fact that he was willing to take such a stand for me touched me deeply, but it also scared me. I didn't want to be the reason he was distancing himself from his family. "My love," he had said, holding her hand, "I don't want you to fight with your family because of me. Maybe we should." He interrupted me with a gesture. "Carmen, listen to me. You are my family now. You and the life we are going to build together. If my mother or anyone else can't accept it, that's their decision. But I won't let anyone come between us or sabotage our happiness." At that moment there was a knock at the door. Lucia had arrived, arms laden with fabric and a fierce determination in her eyes. "Well," she had said as she entered, "show me that dress. We have a wedding to save." With trembling hands, I showed Lucia the charred remains of my wedding dress. Her face darkened at the sight of the mess, but I saw a glint of determination in her eyes. "Carmen, honey," he said as he pulled me into a hug, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. But don't worry, we'll fix it." Lucia has always had the ability to keep her cool in the most stressful situations. That's why she is such a talented stylist and such a valuable friend. She immediately got to work, surveyed the damage and acted quickly. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," he announced after a few minutes. "I know some designers in Barcelona who owe me favors. I'll call them to see what they can do for us on such short notice." Alexander, who had been silent the whole time, put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Everything will be all right, my love," he whispered. "Trust Lucia." As Lucia frantically made calls, Alejandro and I began cleaning up the remains of the burnt dress. Each piece of blackened fabric I picked up broke my heart a little more. I thought of my mother, of all the hours she had spent sewing that dress, putting all her love and hopes for my future into it. "How am I going to tell her?" I whispered, my eyes filled with tears. Alejandro hugged me. "We'll tell her together. Your mother will understand, Carmen. She knows how strong our love is." After what seemed like an eternity, Lucia hung up the phone with a triumphant smile on her lips. "I have good news," she announced. "My friend Javier, a designer from Barcelona, has a dress that might be suitable. It's a unique model he created for a fashion show, but has never worn. He's willing to lend it to us for tomorrow." My heart skipped a beat. "Really? But how are we ever going to get it in time?" Lucia's smile widened. "Now is when it gets interesting. Javier is going to send it by express mail this very afternoon. It should arrive in Seville early tomorrow morning. I will pick him up and take him directly to the church." I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. It was a solution, of course, but there was still so much that could go wrong. "What if the dress doesn't fit me?" I asked in a shaky voice. Lucia put her hands on my shoulders, staring into my eyes. "Carmen, listen to me carefully. This dress is going to fit you like a glove. And even if it doesn't, I'm a stylist, remember? I'll make adjustments on the fly if necessary. You will be the most beautiful bride Seville has ever seen, I promise." Her assurance reassured me a little, but I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. "Lucia," I said quietly, what if this is just a sign? What if all this means that I shouldn't marry Alejandro?" Alejandro, who was eavesdropping on our conversation, immediately approached. "Carmen, no. Don't let my mother's cruel actions make you doubt our love. What we have is real and precious. Don't let her win. Lucia nodded her head. He's right, honey. What happened tonight was terrible, but it doesn't define your relationship. You love each other, and that's all that matters. Her words warmed my heart, but doubt lingered. But Alejandro's family, they'll never really accept me, will they? Alejandro grabbed my face with his hands and forced me to look him in the eyes. Carmen, listen to me. My family will be you. You and the children we will have someday. The others, if they can't see how wonderful you are, they're missing out. We will build our own happiness, with or without their blessing. His words were so full of conviction that I couldn't help but believe them. I nodded my head, feeling a new determination growing inside me. Lucia clapped her hands happily. That's the spirit. Now let's both get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. I'll take care of the dress. When Lucia left, Alejandro and I stood in silence for a while, holding hands, trying to digest everything that had happened. I should go home, Alejandro finally said. I need to talk to my mother. I felt my heart squeeze at the thought of the confrontation that awaited me. Be careful, I whispered. I don't want you fighting with your family permanently because of me. He kissed me tenderly. Don't worry about that. Whatever happens, we'll be together. That's all that matters. When he left, I found myself alone in my apartment, surrounded by the remains of what should have been the eve of my perfect wedding. Despite Lucia's security and Alejandro's affection, I couldn't help but feel anxious. I spent most of the night awake, unable to sleep, my mind replaying over and over again the events of the night. The image of Dona Elena pouring kerosene on my dress, the crackling of the flames devouring the fabric, the pain in Alejandro's eyes when I told him what had happened. Everything was going round and round in my head. Early in the morning, when the first rays of sunlight began to filter through my curtains, I heard my phone vibrate. It was a message from Lucia. The dress has arrived. It is beautiful. Everything will be fine, I promise. Get some more rest. I'll be back in a few hours to help you get ready. I breathed a sigh of relief. At least one thing was going well. But as I began to relax, another thought struck me, my mother. She would soon arrive to help me get ready, waiting to see the dress I had worked so hard on. How was I to explain to her what had happened? As if in answer to my thoughts, I heard a knock at the door. My heart pounding, I went to open the door. My mother was standing there, her face beaming with excitement. My baby girl, she exclaimed as she hugged me. Today is the day. I felt tears well up in my eyes. Mom, I began, my voice trembling, something happened last night. When I told her about the events of the previous day, my mother's face went from confusion to horror, and then to an anger I had never seen in her before. How dare she? She scolded me when I finished my tale. That woman, she has no heart. I'm so sorry, Mom, I sobbed. All the work you put into that dress. My mother hugged me tightly. Honey, don't worry. It's just a dress. What matters is you and your happiness. That Dona Elena, she may think we are poor, but we are rich in love and strength. She will not break us. Her words touched my heart. My mother always had the ability to see the bright side of things, even in the most difficult situations. Lucia has found another dress, I explained. She should be here soon with it. My mother nodded determinedly. Good. Then we'll get you ready for your big day. Does that Dona Elena want to see us fail? We'll show her what the Rodriguezes are capable of. His enthusiasm was contagious. For the first time since the day before, I felt a genuine smile tugging at my lips. A few hours later Lucia arrived, laden with a large bag of clothes. Her face lit up when she saw me. Carmen, you look beautiful already, and we haven't even started. She turned to my mother. Mrs. Rodriguez, I hope you don't mind that I brought a new dress. My mother waved her hand. Not at all, my dear. The important thing is that Carmen is happy and beautiful on her big day. Lucia then opened the cover, revealing the dress. I held my breath. It was absolutely gorgeous, a lace and silk creation, with hand-embroidered details that shimmered in the light. Oh, Lucia, I whispered, my eyes filling with tears. It's perfect. Try it on, Lucia encouraged me. Let's see how it looks on you. With the help of my mother and Lucia, I put on the dress. It looked like it was made for me. It fit my curves perfectly. "You look beautiful, daughter," my mother said, her eyes shining with pride. Lucia made a few small adjustments and stepped back to admire her work. "Carmen, you look absolutely stunning. Alejandro will be speechless." As I looked in the mirror, I felt a new confidence come over me. Yes, the night before had been terrible. Yes, the road ahead was not going to be easy. But in that moment, surrounded by the love of my mother and my best friend, in a dress that made me feel like a princess, I knew everything would be okay. "We should go," Lucia finally said. "The church is waiting for us." As we prepared to leave, I took one last look at my reflection in the mirror. The woman I saw there was no longer the young waitress intimidated by Alejandro's world. She was a strong woman, willing to face any obstacle for the love of her life. "Come on," I said with determination. "I have a wedding to attend." The trip to the church of La Almudena was the longest and the shortest of my life. Every second seemed eternal, and yet, before I knew it, we had arrived. Lucia had insisted that we take a single car instead of the limousine originally planned. "Let's make a discreet entrance," she had said with a wink. "Let's save the wow factor for inside the church." As we got closer, I could see the guests entering the church. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. In the crowd, I saw some familiar faces from Alejandro's family. Some looked tense, others curious. I wondered how many of them would know what had happened the day before. "Take a deep breath, my daughter," my mother whispered to me as she squeezed my hand. "You are precious and you deserve all the happiness in the world." The car stopped in front of the side entrance to the church. Lucia got out first and checked that the road was clear. She nodded at me with an encouraging smile. "It's time, Carmen. Are you ready?" I took a deep breath and nodded, "I'm ready." With the help of my mother and Lucia, I stepped out of the car. The Sevillian sun was shining brightly, making the embroidered details of my dress sparkle. I heard some murmurs of surprise from the guests still waiting outside. "Look," I heard someone whisper. "It's not the dress we saw at the dressmaker's." Ignoring the comments, we headed for the church entrance. There my father was waiting for us, his face a mixture of pride and restrained emotion. "My little girl," he said, tears in his eyes. "You look stunning." He offered me his arm and together we faced the large church doors. I felt my heart race again. Behind those doors was Alejandro, the man I loved more than anything in the world. But there was also his family, including Dona Elena. How would they react when they saw me? As if she had read my mind, Lucia leaned over to me. "Remember, Carmen. You're strong, you're beautiful, and you deserve to be here. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." I nodded, grateful for her support. The doors opened and the music started. All the guests stood up and turned to look at me. I took a last deep breath and took my first step down the aisle. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel all eyes on me, some in admiration, some in surprise, some even in amazement. But I only had eyes for one person, Alejandro. He was standing at the altar, magnificent in his dark suit. When our gazes met, I saw his eyes light up and a radiant smile spread across his face. At that moment, everything else disappeared. The guests, the whispers, the looks, everything disappeared. It was just him and me. As I walked slowly down the aisle on my father's arm, I heard murmurs of admiration. The dress that Lucia had miraculously found was truly spectacular, catching the light filtering through the stained glass windows of the church and creating an almost ethereal effect. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Dona Elena sitting in the front row. Her face was a mask of disbelief and contained rage. It was clear that she was hoping I wouldn't show up, or perhaps that I would arrive shattered. Seeing her like that, powerless in the face of our happiness, gave me a sense of triumph I had never felt before. When we reached the altar, my father kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Alejandro's. The touch of his skin against mine immediately calmed me. The touch of his skin against mine immediately reassured me. The touch of his skin against mine immediately soothed me. "You are absolutely beautiful," Alejandro whispered, his eyes shining with love and admiration. The priest began the ceremony, but I found it hard to concentrate on what he was saying. My mind kept going back to the events of the last 24 hours. How had we gone from total disaster to this perfect moment? When it was time to exchange our vows, Alejandro took my hands in his, squeezing them gently as if to instill courage in me. "Carmen," he began, his voice full of emotion, "when I met you that day in that little cafe in Seville, I could never have imagined how much my life would change. You taught me what it really means to love, what it means to be authentic and true to yourself. You gave me the courage to defy expectations and follow my heart. Today I promise to love you more every day, to support you through every trial and to build with you a life full of happiness and love." Her words moved me deeply. I had to take a moment to regain my voice before uttering my own vows. "Alejandro," I said, with tears in my eyes, "you turned my world upside down in a way I never thought possible. You loved me for who I am, without trying to change me. You gave me the strength to believe in myself and in our love, even in the face of the greatest obstacles. Today I promise you that I will always be by your side, in good times and bad. I promise to love you unconditionally, to support you in all your dreams and to build with you a home filled with love, respect, and understanding." As we exchanged rings, I felt a surge of excitement come over me. We had made it. Despite all the obstacles, despite all the attempts to separate us, there we were, united before God and our loved ones. "I pronounce you husband and wife," the priest announced. "You may kiss the bride." Alejandro pulled me to him and kissed me so tenderly it took my breath away. The applause and cheers of the guests filled the church, but for me it was just the two of us at that moment. When we parted, our eyes turned to the audience. Most of the guests were smiling and applauding warmly. Even some members of Alejandro's family, who had been reticent at first, seemed moved by the ceremony. But my eyes were fixed on Dona Elena. She was still sitting, rigid, her face pale. Our gazes met for a moment. I saw in his eyes a mixture of emotions, anger, frustration, but also, surprisingly, a hint of grudging respect. I knew I had lost this battle. Holding hands, Alejandro and I walked down the aisle under a shower of rose petals. As we left the church, we were greeted with shouts of joy by our friends and family. Lucia came running up to me, tears in her eyes. "You looked beautiful, Carmen. I knew that dress would look perfect on you." My mother and father join us and hug us. "We are so proud of you," my father says, his voice trembling with emotion. As we made our way to the waiting car, I felt Alejandro stiffen beside me. I followed his gaze and saw that Dona Elena was coming toward us. "Alejandro, Carmen," she said, her voice tense but controlled. "Congratulations." There was a moment of awkward silence. I could feel the tension emanating from Alejandro. But, to my great surprise, it was I who spoke. "Thank you, Dona Elena," I said, in a calm and confident voice. "We are delighted that you were able to witness our union." He looked at me with a shocked look on his face. Maybe he expected me to be angry or scared. But in that moment, filled with Alejandro's love and the support of those close to us, I felt stronger than ever. Dona Elena nodded, then turned to her son. "Alejandro, I hope we can talk later." Alejandro squeezed my hand. "Of course, mother. But today is our day. We will celebrate it with those who truly support our union." With that, we climbed into the waiting car. As it drove away, I took one last look at the church of La Almudena. It had been a day full of surprises and challenges, but mostly full of unwavering love. "What are you thinking about, my love?" asked Alejandro, gently caressing my cheek. I smiled, my heart overflowing with happiness. "I think this is the beginning of a beautiful adventure, my love. Our adventure." He kissed me tenderly and, as the car drove us to the wedding reception, I knew with certainty that whatever the future held for us, we would face it together, stronger than ever. Our wedding reception was held in one of the most beautiful gardens in Seville. The lanterns hanging from the trees created a magical atmosphere, while the soft music of a flamenco group filled the air. Alejandro and I had just finished our first dance as husband and wife, to the warm applause of our guests. As we made our way to our table, Alejandro leaned over to me and whispered, "You are the most beautiful bride the world has ever seen, my love. I am the luckiest man on earth." Her compliment made me blush, but before I could answer her, I noticed a commotion near the garden entrance. Dona Elena had just arrived and her face was a mask of restrained excitement. She walked straight towards us, ignoring the curious glances of the other guests. "Alejandro, Carmen," he said, his voice tense but controlled. "May I speak with you privately for a moment?" Alejandro shook my hand, letting me choose. I nodded, feeling that this moment was important. We moved away to a quiet corner of the garden, away from curious onlookers. Dona Elena took a deep breath before speaking. I want to apologize," she began, the words seeming to cost her considerable effort. "My behavior was unforgivable. I was blinded by my prejudices and my fear of change." I felt Alexander stiffen beside me. "Mother, your actions almost ruined the happiest day of our lives. How do you expect us to forgive you so easily?" Dona Elena lowered her eyes. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed genuinely embarrassed. "I don't expect immediate forgiveness, Alejandro. I know what I have done is unforgivable. But seeing the two of you today, the love that binds you together, I realized how wrong I was." She turned to me, her eyes shining with restrained tears. "Carmen, I judged you unfairly. I let my prejudices and arrogance dictate my actions. Now I see the strength and grace you have shown, despite my attempts to hurt you. You are far nobler than I will ever be." His words touched me deeply. I could feel her sincerity, despite the pain still fresh from her past actions. "Dona Elena," I said softly, "what you did hurt us deeply. But hatred and resentment will only prolong that pain. Today is a day of joy and love. If you are truly sincere in your desire to change, maybe we can try to start over." Alejandro looked at me with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Carmen is right, Mother. We can't erase the past, but we can choose how we want to move forward." Dona Elena nodded, tears running freely down her cheeks. "I thank you for your generosity. I don't deserve it, but I promise to do everything I can to regain your trust." It was then that Alejandro surprised me. He took a deep breath and said, "Mother, there is something you should know. I have made an important decision." Dona Elena looked at him worriedly. "What do you mean, Alejandro?" "I have decided to give up my inheritance," he announced in a firm voice. "I'm going to donate most of my fortune to charities that support young people from disadvantaged backgrounds." I held my breath, surprised by this revelation. We had never talked about it. Dona Elena blanched. But why?" "Alejandro, we are talking about the family heritage." Alejandro took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Because Carmen has opened my eyes to what really matters in life. Money and social status don't make you happy. Love, compassion, and the desire to make a difference in the world, that's what's really important." He turned to me, his eyes shining with love and determination. "Carmen taught me what it really means to be rich. Rich in love, in value, in integrity. I want to use the resources I have to help other people have the same opportunities she created for herself." I was speechless, moved to tears by her words. Dona Elena seemed just as surprised. "But, how are you going to live?" she asked, clearly worried. Alejandro smiled. "We'll work, like everyone else. I have skills, an education. Carmen is about to become a nurse. We don't need millions to be happy." I squeezed his hand, overcome with emotion. "Alejandro, are you sure about this? It's a very important decision." He brought my hand to his lips and kissed it tenderly. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life, my love. You taught me the value of hard work and integrity. I want to live by those principles." Dona Elena remained silent for a long time, observing us. Then, to our surprise, she smiled. A real smile, the first I'd ever seen on his face. "I'm beginning to get it," he said quietly. "Carmen, you have really changed my son, and for the better. I now see in you the strength of character that Alejandro so admires." He took a deep breath. "If that's really what you want to do, Alejandro, then I'll support you. And I'd like to contribute to these charities, too. Maybe it's time to rethink my priorities, too." This statement left Alejandro and me dumbfounded. It was a radical departure from the woman we knew. "Mother," Alejandro finally said, his voice trembling with emotion. This means a lot to us. I felt it was time to extend an olive branch. Dona Elena, why don't you join us for the rest of the celebration? It would be a beautiful symbol of a new beginning. He hesitated a moment and then nodded. It will be an honor, Carmen. Thank you. As we walked back to the party, Alejandro, Dona Elena, and I holding hands, I felt that something had changed profoundly. It was not just the end of a conflict, it was the beginning of a new understanding, of a new family. The evening continued in an atmosphere of joy and reconciliation. Seeing Dona Elena chatting amicably with my parents, laughing at Lucia's jokes, and even doing a few dance steps, was surreal but wonderful. That same night, as Alejandro and I took a moment to ourselves, she pulled me into her arms. Carmen, he said, his gaze locked on mine, I know our path will not always be easy. Giving up my inheritance, starting a new life, it will be a challenge. But with you by my side, I know we can get through anything. I tenderly caressed his cheek. Alejandro, you have given me so much more than a name or a fortune. You have given me your love, your trust and, now, the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. I am proud of you, my love, and I will always be there to support you. We sealed that promise with a tender kiss under the starry Seville sky. All around us, the party was in full swing, a joyful mingling of our two worlds finally reunited. As the evening progressed, I realized that our story was much more than a modern fairy tale. It was a lesson in the power of love to overcome prejudice, the ability to change and grow, and the importance of staying true to one's values. Our journey had only just begun, but I was sure of one thing: whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger and more united than ever.